Hello, I'm David Eichholtz with David Richard Gallery, located in New York City. And today I am with Robert Walker, who's an artist who lives in Los Angeles, California, and came in. His first outing post-pandemic, well, not post-pandemic, we're still in it, I guess. We are. But your first trip. And I actually went to a restaurant for the first time last Friday evening with an artist that also came into town from Santa Fe, his first trip in an airplane since the pandemic started. So anyhow, so it's kind of nice and refreshing, and to be fully vaccinated, as are you. So this is actually your first exhibition in New York City.
That's right.
And the first exhibition with our gallery. We've been aware of each other's, of your work, and you've been aware of our gallery for some time. And we actually connected through internet.
That's right.
Well, not internet, but Instagram. And it turns out we have a lot of friends and people in common. And so it's not a surprise that our paths crossed. And this is an interesting body of work. It's brand new work. And we're, there's 14 pieces in this show. So what we'd like to do today is talk about the work. And there are a lot of things that are similar to your earlier work, and there's a lot of stuff that's sort of new and different, I think, from what I've seen of your work and the research that I've done.
That's pretty accurate.
So that's what's kind of exciting about it, that it's so different. So what drew me to the work? In fact, I think I squealed when I saw the first one on Instagram and immediately shot you a note and said, "What are these? Are these yours?"
That's right. I was surprised.
You were surprised?
Sure.
So you hadn't really thought about these compositionally this way, or were they just sort of organically evolved just out of
They did evolve organically. It's almost a cliche to say it's a pandemic series, but for a lot of artists, all of a sudden you didn't have to deal with the real world. I belonged to a couple of arts organizations. There were board meetings, commission meetings. I didn't have to do any of that.
So you could just focus on something different and new.
So it was great. It was like a gift. So,
well, what's really strange is the first time I saw this work, well, what's strange is, given the content in it, there's a lot of content in this. I think it's really very important about this body of work versus a lot of your other work, which tended to look more formalist.
It was.
And so this has a lot more going on, and which makes it interesting and different at the same time. But what really grabbed me, and this is probably not the best painting to be standing in front of to say what I'm going to say. This one's probably more like the rest of the work, and this is the piece you picked as the lead for the show.
That's right.
And I purposely put it next to this one because this one aesthetically, I think, is the most different painting.
It was the last.
Yeah, and it's more open and negative space, less layering and saturation. So my point is that when I saw this, and especially on Instagram, it was just like bedazzling. It was just, it was just lush, exuberant, it was just action-packed, and that's how it hit me at first. And I didn't really dive into it until you started posting some more of them, and then we started talking about doing a presentation. They said, well, what would you like to do? And I said, well, I think the new things you're doing are pretty spectacular, so is that an option? And you said they were, but you were only halfway through what you thought was a body of work. So you said if we could push the show till you could get further along.
You gave me a pretty narrow window originally.
I thought it was like months and months. Well, you said you were sitting around bored twiddling your thumbs.
So I did ask for more time.
You did.
I did.
But then when you started sending me the images and I started dissecting them, knowing that I was going to have to write about them, and which I was always doing, I was excited about it. Then I started looking at it, realizing, wow, these are, and at first I thought, like when I saw the lotus and the Om symbol, which I'm not seeing one here, but there was several in this painting here, the Om. And I started looking at them more carefully and realizing, because my initial thought was they're very psychedelic and very trippy, which I'm just immediately drawn to. It's like a moth to a flame.
I know you are.
And so, and I loved all this density of layering of very formalist sort of issues and concerns. So you have, they're very trippy and optical. There's the dots and geometry. But intermixed with all of this are framing devices. This one has a lot of sort of frame, very,
right.
Not quite Howard Hodgkins-like, but yours are more, well, like this outer one is really Frank Stella, I realized. This is riffing off of that series of pieces a bit. And you probably didn't even realize you were doing it because it was just sort of flowing out of your hand. But it sort of reminds me a lot of the Protractor series.
That's right.
And
I didn't think of it that way. I was just doing it.
Well, I didn't either until just now. As I looked
Right.
at this and I thought, oh, wait a minute. These
Right.
look like, how he broke up a circle.
They were actually segments of an endless knot painting I did.
Oh, okay.
But they do look like Stella now looking at it.
Well,
but, you
especially
know.
now that it's so fragmented.
Yeah, right.
But that's the other thing too, is then you do like these really nice sort of black and white. Black and white seems to come in and out of these paintings quite a bit, and what I notice about it, I don't know if you use it as a tool or a device, but Olli Savonen, a Nordic artist who lived and worked here in New York City, and we represent his estate, he started later in his career bringing, because he was collaging and bringing a lot of different elements to create motion in a two-dimensional picture plane. So he wanted all this sort of feeling of activity and not just vibrating and pulsing, but literally sort of like a motion. And he got tons of Gottlieb grants and Guggenheims and other things to work on this stuff. And I feel he was very successful at it, and it was this last body of work. But what really kind of finally pulled it all together was the incorporation of a lot of black and white stripes. And then there's other artists who, like Rolf Scarlett and people like that, when they do these geometric things, would do a lot of black and white checkerboards, which was almost sort of like a calming or sort of quiet zone for your eye to sort of rest, to kind of reinvigorate it, to get reinvigorated to jump back into all of the color.
I do put that in quite a bit. I was
So
looking at...
you view that as a device, or was it simply just an aesthetic choice at the moment?
It wasn't, and it didn't involve any intentionality. I think it was just something I was drawn to.
Okay.
It almost always works. It is calming because, you work into the pattern instead of flying all over like they do.
Yeah, but even with pattern on pattern, when you have pattern on pattern and color on color, it seems like then, even if it's a pattern and it's black and white and it occurs a few times through the painting, it seems to kind of coalesce, I find.
I think I did that almost unconsciously, but now that you mention it, yes. I think it's in almost every painting, and I do like it.
Some more than others, I've noticed, and it's kind of interesting because the more they're up, and I've been living with them and walking past them every day, and you start really kind of deconstructing them a lot more. But that's what caught my eye. And then when we started getting into them, at first I thought of them as almost like, the reason why I bring up Psychedelic, I was thinking like the poster art from San Francisco. And that was always this melange of just different things happening. Because Psychedelic is always this kind of mix of surrealism and op art and Madras plaid and color and dichroic color combinations and fluorescence.
Listen, I came out of that. I came out of art school in the 70s. So, and I think the first show I ever saw, I was in high school, and it was a reiteration of the big show here in New York, The Responsive Eye.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there was, and I was in high school.
Oh, and Olli Savonen was in that show too.
Yeah.
The Responsive Eye.
That's right. So it was always there, and I liked it. But it was a pejorative when I was in art school.
Mm-hmm.
It was too hippy-dippy, and so you just eschewed it.
Right, and the op art artists per se, they didn't think of themselves that way, and they were colorists, most of them. You know, when you think about Julian Stansack and Richard Anaskevich and people like that, they came out of color and color theory. They studied with Albers. And that really wasn't their intent. It was more to be
Definitely
experiential.
not Albers. Albers hated when he was discussed in that context. He said, I'm not an op artist.
Right. And a lot of, because what ended up happening, I think, that turned off a lot of people was, not turned them off, but just, I think for a lot of artists was then when it became so co-opted by the design world.
Oh, yes.
Shower curtains, clothing, socks. And,
of course.
And I think it was just not how artists had intended their work to be sort of, utilized, but.
Not during minimalism, no.
Yeah. Well, oddly, Jeb was the one that coined the phrase op art.
Yes, I know.
So from the show at Martha Jackson's for Julian Stansack.
That's right. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah. So anyway, he did it himself. But so that's what drew me to these, when I saw them on Instagram, which is always, a very condensed way of viewing anything. But it was powerful, when I saw it. So a roundabout way of getting then to what these paintings really have a lot in, I realized, is when I started seeing the detailed pictures, is a lot around religion. It's Hinduism, Zen Buddhism, and it's all of these symbols around sort of centering, meditation, higher consciousness, and the eye, the third eye, the lotus, like I said, the Om symbol over here. But then I started looking at the formalist work components, I should say, the formalist components. And I immediately were drawn to things that, were like the Stella-esque, which we just realized that's possibly what it is. But really what drew me was I loved the curves and the color and the fact that it was a frame. And, and bounded by another frame, and then this frame. And so, and then there's Paisleys, which I'm also drawn to immediately. And, but I realized, though, that some of this was very familiar to me in terms of the artist. Other work was not, other elements of these. So there's sort of your sort of designs or things that you kind of gravitate towards. And some of these things, present themselves a number of different times. The chair is an interesting feature.
The chair is in every painting.
Oh yeah, I just realized it's right here too. It's obfuscated with the black lines.
Right, right.
It's like slats. And so I had to ask you about that, because at first I thought of something else, because there were a couple of other artists that I've known of through the years, and it mostly emerged during the 80s. Chairs were sort of a common theme.
They were.
But then I realized from you that you're coming at it from the empty chair at like a dining table, which was, as you said, is not for the Buddha per se, but to remind you of the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings.
That's right.
And so I found that fascinating, but yet you've picked up on all these really great different...
Well, I wanted everyone to be different.
And they are. They're French, they're Chinese, they're,
I think that one appears a couple.
Yeah, modern.
I was sort of running out of...
interior design.
appropriating chairs from here, there, and everywhere. But, I remember when I began to teach art history survey, talking about an Indian stupa with the empty chair on the inside, representing the teachings of the Buddha.
Right.
And, the Buddha didn't want images of himself. He didn't approve of that. So it was a way of representing the Buddha and then concentrating on his teachings.
Mm-hmm.
So I just really like that. So that's sort of the first thing I was putting in, most of them.